My name is George, and until 6 months ago, I thought I understood everything about my privileged but predictable life. At 28, I was the heir to the Whitmore family fortune, living in the sprawling Connecticut estate where I'd grown up, managing investments and charitable foundations while avoiding any real responsibility or emotional commitment. My days were filled with board meetings, social obligations, and the kind of carefully orchestrated emptiness that comes with inherited wealth and limited purpose. The one constant in my life had been Albert, our family's butler for over 30 years. Albert had been more than just household staff. He'd been a mentor, confidant, and often the closest thing to a father figure I'd had after my parents died in a car accident when I was 15. He'd helped me navigate the complexities of grief, wealth, and the expectations that came with being the last of the Whitmore line, which is why his announcement that he was retiring came as such a shock. "Master George," Albert said one morning as he served breakfast in the dining room that was far too large for one person, "I need to discuss something important with you." "Of course, Albert. What's on your mind?" "I've decided it's time for me to retire. My arthritis has been getting worse, and I think it's time to step back and let someone younger take over the household management." I stared at him, my coffee cup halfway to my lips. "Retire? Albert, you can't retire. You're part of this place. Part of the family." Albert's expression was kind but resolute. "Sir, I'm 72 years old. I've served the Whitmore family faithfully for 3 decades, but it's time for me to rest. But who would replace you? How could anyone possibly fill your role?" "Actually, sir, I have a suggestion. My son Henry has been working in estate management in England for the past 8 years. He's highly qualified and would be honored to continue the family tradition of service." I'd heard Albert mention his son occasionally over the years, but Henry had always been a distant figure, someone pursuing his own career across the Atlantic, someone I'd never expected to meet. The idea of him taking over Albert's position felt like a poor substitute for the irreplaceable man who'd been managing our household for most of my life. "Albert, I appreciate the suggestion, but I can't imagine anyone replacing you. Maybe we could hire additional staff to help with the physical demands, adjust your responsibilities." "Sir, with respect, this isn't a negotiation. I've made my decision. Henry will arrive next week to begin the transition. I'm confident you'll find him more than capable." That was the end of the discussion. When Albert made a decision, it was final, and I'd learned long ago that arguing with him was futile. But as I contemplated the idea of someone new managing the household that had been Albert's domain for decades, I felt a sense of loss that was disproportionate to what should have been a simple staffing change. Henry Blackwood arrived on a rainy Thursday afternoon in October, and my first sight of him challenged every assumption I'd made about Albert's son. Where I'd expected someone older, perhaps a smaller version of his distinguished father, I found a man about my own age with dark hair, sharp green eyes, and the kind of understated elegance that suggested expensive education and natural sophistication. He was tall and lean, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that somehow managed to look both professional and effortlessly stylish. When Albert introduced us in the front hall, Henry extended his hand with a firm grip and a polite smile that was friendly but appropriately respectful. "Master George," Henry said, his accent a refined mixture of English boarding school and something distinctly American underneath. "It's an honor to meet you. Father has told me so much about you and the estate. Please, just George, and welcome to Whitmore Manor. I hope the transition won't be too overwhelming." "Thank you. I'm looking forward to learning the household routines and ensuring everything continues to run smoothly." There was something about Henry's demeanor that immediately set him apart from typical household staff. He was deferential without being subservient, professional without being distant. When he spoke, it was with the confidence of someone accustomed to managing complex situations, and his knowledge of estate management was clearly extensive. Over the next 2 weeks, as Albert gradually transferred responsibilities to his son, I found myself paying attention to Henry in ways that had nothing to do with household management. He moved through the house with quiet efficiency, learning the routines and preferences that Albert had perfected over decades. But he also brought his own ideas and improvements, suggesting subtle changes that enhanced the household's operation without disrupting its essential character. "Henry," I said one morning when I found him reviewing the wine cellar inventory, "how are you finding everything so far?" "Very well, thank you. Your father, that is, the previous Mr. Whitmore, assembled an impressive collection. The 1982 Bordeaux selection is particularly noteworthy. You know wine. I studied sommelier techniques as part of my training in estate management. Understanding wine service is essential when managing formal dinners and social events." "That's more comprehensive than I expected." Henry looked up from his clipboard, and I caught a glimpse of something that might have been amusement in his green eyes. "Sir, if I may say so, I think you may have some misconceptions about modern estate management. It's quite different from what it was in my father's generation." "What do you mean?" "I have degrees in business administration and hospitality management from Oxford. I've managed estates for members of parliament, coordinated events for foreign dignitaries, and overseen household staff of 30 or more. This isn't just traditional butler service. It's comprehensive property and lifestyle management." I stared at Henry, suddenly realizing that I'd been thinking of him as Albert's replacement rather than as a professional in his own right. "I apologize. I think I underestimated your qualifications." "No apology necessary. It's natural to compare me to father. He set a very high standard. But I hope to bring my own strengths to the position while maintaining the level of service your family deserves." "What kind of strengths?" "Technology integration, for one thing. I'd like to modernize some of the household systems, digital inventory management, electronic scheduling, more efficient communication protocols. Also, I have extensive experience with event planning and guest services that might be useful if you decide to host more social functions." The conversation revealed layers to Henry that I hadn't expected. He wasn't just Albert's son stepping into his father's shoes. He was an accomplished professional with his own vision for household management. More intriguingly, he was clearly intelligent and educated in ways that challenged the traditional boundaries between staff and employer. "Henry, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you want this position? With your qualifications, you could probably manage estates for royalty or international celebrities. Why come back to work for a reclusive American heir in Connecticut?" Henry was quiet for a moment, seeming to consider his answer carefully. "Honestly, because I wanted to come home. I've spent 8 years managing other people's lives and properties, and I've been very successful at it. But this estate, working for your family, it's part of my heritage, part of who I am. My father found meaning and purpose in service to the Whitmores. I'd like to continue that legacy while bringing it into the modern era. And working for someone your own age doesn't feel strange. Why would it? George, if I may call you that. The best professional relationships are built on mutual respect rather than hierarchical distance. I'm here to make your life easier and more efficient, not to maintain artificial barriers that serve no practical purpose." Over the following weeks, as Albert gradually stepped back and Henry assumed full responsibility for household management, I began to understand what he'd meant about modern estate service. The house ran more smoothly than it had in years, but it also felt more alive, more connected to the contemporary world. Henry introduced digital systems that streamlined everything from grocery ordering to maintenance scheduling. He coordinated with my financial advisors to optimize household budgets. He even suggested social events that might help me build professional networks and community connections that had been neglected during my years of relative isolation. "George," Henry said one evening as we reviewed plans for a charitable fundraiser he'd proposed hosting at the estate, "I hope you don't mind me saying so, but you seem to be living somewhat below your potential." "What do you mean?" "I mean you have resources, education, and social position that could be used to make a significant impact. Instead, you're essentially hiding in this beautiful but isolated estate, managing investments but not really engaging with the world. That's a rather direct assessment from my butler. Henry looked up from the event planning documents spread across the library table. You're right, and I apologize if I've overstepped. But George, in my experience, people are happiest when they're using their abilities to their fullest extent. You're intelligent, well-educated, and financially positioned to pursue almost any goal you choose. Don't you want something more challenging than managing your inheritance? It was exactly the kind of conversation I'd been avoiding for years, the questions about purpose and direction that I'd been too comfortable to seriously consider. But coming from Henry, the challenge felt different, not judgmental, but genuinely curious about what might make me happier. What would you suggest? What interests you? What did you study in college? What do you think about when you're not focused on financial management? I studied art history, actually. I've always been interested in cultural preservation, museum work, that sort of thing. Then why aren't you pursuing that? Because it's not practical. The family fortune requires management, the estate needs oversight, and I have responsibilities that don't leave time for indulgent career pursuits. Henry was quiet for a moment, then smiled in a way that suggested he'd identified a problem he could solve. George, what if I told you that you could pursue your interests in art and cultural preservation while still maintaining your family responsibilities? How? By using your resources strategically. Fund cultural preservation projects, serve on museum boards, establish foundations that support the causes you care about. You don't have to choose between responsibility and passion. You can use one to pursue the other. The conversation was a revelation. For years, I'd seen my inheritance as a burden that limited my choices rather than a tool that could expand them. Henry was suggesting a completely different framework for thinking about wealth and responsibility. You really think that would work? I know it would work. George, I've managed estates for people who've built entire philanthropic empires around their personal interests. The key is strategic planning and professional management of both your financial resources and your time. And you could help coordinate something like that? It's exactly the kind of comprehensive estate management I specialize in. Coordinating your philanthropic activities, managing social calendars for maximum networking impact, ensuring your household runs efficiently so you can focus on the work that matters to you. As autumn turned to winter, Henry and I worked together to develop a plan for transforming my isolated existence into something more purposeful and engaging. He helped me research cultural preservation organizations, identified museum board positions that matched my interests, and began coordinating the kind of social events that would build the professional relationships necessary for effective philanthropy. But somewhere in the process of planning my more engaged future, I began to realize that my interest in Henry went far beyond his professional capabilities. He was brilliant, certainly, but it was more than that. Henry had a way of listening that made me feel heard, a perspective on life that challenged my assumptions, and a quiet confidence that was both attractive and inspiring. When we worked late into the evening planning events or reviewing foundation proposals, I found myself paying attention to things that had nothing to do with estate management. The way he concentrated when reading, the sound of his laugh when something amused him, the casual elegance with which he moved through the world. More troubling was the growing awareness that Henry seemed to enjoy our evening planning sessions as much as I did. What had started as practical work meetings had evolved into long conversations about art, culture, philosophy, and our respective backgrounds. Henry would linger after we'd finished reviewing documents, and I would find excuses to extend our discussions rather than dismiss him for the evening. George, Henry said one evening in December as we reviewed plans for a New Year's fundraising gala. Can I ask you something personal? Of course. Have you ever been in a serious relationship? I realize it's none of my business, but coordinating your social calendar effectively requires understanding your personal preferences and commitments. The question caught me off guard, both because it was indeed personal and because it forced me to confront how isolated my romantic life had become. No, not really. I dated some in college and afterward, but nothing serious. I've been fairly focused on managing family responsibilities. That seems like a significant sacrifice. Don't you want companionship? Someone to share your life with? I suppose I've never met anyone who seemed worth the complications. Most people who express interest in me are either gold diggers or social climbers looking for advantageous connections. Henry nodded thoughtfully. That must make it difficult to trust people's motivations. It does. What about you? I assume someone with your background and qualifications has had opportunities for relationships. Some. But my work has involved a lot of travel and irregular schedules, which doesn't lend itself to stable relationships. Plus, working in estate management often means living in other people's homes, which can complicate personal boundaries. And now, do you feel like this position offers more stability for personal relationships? Henry looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Potentially, though there are still challenges related to professional boundaries and appropriate behavior. Something in his tone suggested layers of meaning beyond the surface conversation, but I wasn't sure how to interpret them without risking an inappropriate assumption. The fundraising gala Henry had organized turned out to be a tremendous success, both as a social event and as a showcase for what our estate could accommodate. We hosted over 100 guests, including museum directors, cultural preservation advocates, and philanthropic leaders from across New England. The evening raised significant funds for historical preservation projects while establishing my reputation as a serious supporter of cultural causes. But what impressed me most was watching Henry orchestrate the entire event with seamless professionalism. He coordinated with caterers, managed guest services, ensured that every detail was perfect while remaining nearly invisible to the attendees. It was a masterclass in hospitality management that reminded me just how skilled he was at his profession. Henry, I said after the last guests had departed and we were reviewing the evening's success, that was extraordinary. I've never seen event management executed so flawlessly. Thank you. It was a pleasure to see you in your element, engaging with people who share your interests and appreciate your knowledge. I couldn't have done any of it without your planning and coordination. Of course you could have. You're a natural at this, George. You just needed the right framework and support structure. We were standing in the library, surrounded by the remnants of party planning materials and the warm afterglow of a successful evening. Henry had loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen him. There was something about the intimacy of the moment, the quiet house, the shared satisfaction of a job well done, the absence of formal roles and responsibilities that made me want to say things I'd been carefully avoiding. Henry, I need to tell you something. What's that? Working with you over these past few months has been the most rewarding experience I've had in years. Not just professionally, but personally. You've helped me remember what it feels like to be excited about the future. Henry was very still, watching my face with careful attention. I'm glad to hear that. But it's more than that. I've developed feelings for you that go beyond professional appreciation. The admission hung between us like a challenge, dangerous and irreversible. George, Henry said quietly, I need you to understand what you're saying. I work for you. I live in your house. There are boundaries that exist for good reasons. I know that. And I'm not asking you to jeopardize your position or compromise your professional ethics. But Henry, I needed you to know that my feelings for you have become much more personal than they should be. Henry was quiet for a long moment, and I began to panic that I'd misread the situation entirely, that the warmth and connection I'd felt between us had been one-sided. George, he said finally, what if I told you that my feelings for you were equally complicated? What do you mean? I mean that somewhere between planning your social calendar and coordinating your philanthropic activities, I've fallen for you in ways that are completely inappropriate for someone in my position. I stared at Henry, trying to process what he'd just admitted. Really, you're intelligent, kind, genuinely committed to using your privileges for good causes. You treat me with respect and consideration that goes far beyond normal employer-employee relationships. George, these past few months of working closely with you have been the most professionally and personally satisfying of my career. So what do we do about it? I don't know. The practical complications are significant. I work for you. I live in your house, and getting involved romantically could jeopardize both my professional reputation and your household stability. What if we could address those complications? Henry looked at me with curiosity. How? What if our relationship evolved beyond employer and employee? What if we became partners in a more comprehensive sense? George, I'm not sure I understand what you're suggesting. I'm suggesting that we stop thinking of this as a simple household management arrangement and start thinking of it as a partnership. You've already demonstrated that you're capable of much more than traditional butler services. What if we formalize that into something that reflects the full scope of your abilities, such as estate manager, philanthropic coordinator, business partner? Henry, you've essentially been managing my entire life for the past few months, and you've been doing it better than I ever managed myself. What if we made that official? Henry was quiet, considering the implications of what I was suggesting. And the personal side? The personal side we figure out as we go, but as equals rather than employer and employee. George, are you sure about this? You'd be taking a significant risk, both professionally and personally. I'm sure. Henry, you've already transformed my life in ways I couldn't have imagined. I'd rather take the risk of exploring what we could be together than spend the rest of my life wondering what we might have missed. Henry studied my face for a long moment, then smiled with the first completely unguarded expression I'd seen from him since his arrival. In that case, he said, stepping closer, I'd very much like to kiss you. I'd very much like that too. When Henry kissed me, it was with the same careful attention to detail that he brought to everything else, tender but confident, professional boundaries finally giving way to personal desire. He tasted like champagne from the evening's celebration and possibility, and when we broke apart, I felt like everything in my life had finally clicked into place. So, Henry said, his forehead resting against mine, I suppose this changes our working relationship significantly. I suppose it does. Are you okay with that? George, I've been hoping for exactly this change since about a week after I arrived. I just never imagined you'd feel the same way. Really? You've been thinking about this for months. I've been thinking about you for months. The work arrangement was just a convenient excuse to spend time together while I tried to figure out if you might be interested in something more personal. And I've been trying to figure out how to tell you that you'd become much more important to me than a household manager should be. Well, now we know. 6 months later, Henry and I had successfully transformed both our professional and personal relationship into something that worked on multiple levels. He'd officially become my partner in managing both the estate and my expanding philanthropic activities, while we'd privately become partners in the more traditional romantic sense. The transition hadn't been without challenges. We'd had to navigate questions from staff, curiosity from social contacts, and the practical complexities of combining business and personal relationships. But Henry's professionalism and my commitment to treating him as an equal rather than an employee had made the process smoother than either of us had expected. Any regrets? Henry asked one evening as we reviewed plans for an art conservation project we were funding together. About falling in love with my butler? About completely restructuring my life around someone I've known for less than a year? About potentially scandalizing my social circle by dating the help? Any of it. All of it. I looked around the library where we'd had so many of our planning sessions, where we'd first acknowledged our feelings for each other, where we decided to build something together that defied conventional categories. None, I said honestly. Though I still can't believe your father's retirement led to the best thing that's ever happened to me. Father always said that sometimes the most important changes come from the most unexpected sources. Do you think he knew when he recommended you for the position? Henry grinned, and I caught a glimpse of the mischievous intelligence that had drawn me to him from the beginning. Let's just say that father is much more perceptive about people than he usually lets on. As Henry pulled me close for a kiss that tasted like home and partnership, and the kind of love that grows stronger when it's built on mutual respect and shared goals, I marveled at how completely my life had changed since Albert's retirement announcement. I'd started the year as an isolated heir going through the motions of managing family wealth. Now I was part of a team, both professionally and personally, working on projects that mattered while building a relationship that challenged every assumption I'd made about what my life could be. I love you, I told Henry, words that still felt new and precious even after months of saying them. I love you too, he replied. Employer, partner, and best friend. In that order? In every order that matters.